Savannah walked through the station's entrance, the air thick with the smell of fuel and the bustle of activity. Her eyes lingered on the other passengers, faces filled with excitement or tension. She felt a vague worry, an intuition she couldn't shake. As she made her way to the first-class check-in counter, the employee's professional smile did little to ease the unease creeping over her. Savannah adjusted her scarf, trying to focus on the goal ahead. But from the very first moment, she noticed the cold, cutting stare of Patrick, the security officer. She maintained her composure, yet Patrick's actions quickly made her realize this wasn't a routine check. The way he interrogated her, his tone heavy with judgment, as if he had already decided she wasn't trustworthy, tightened her heart. Still, she knew she couldn't let this humiliation defeat her. In a steady voice, she patiently explained her ticket and her reason for being there. But Patrick merely smirked, his eyes defiant, turning his questions into veiled accusations. In that moment, Savannah felt a surge of powerlessness, but she refused to give in. The hope that the truth would eventually be revealed spurred her onward. As she was led through a side door, she glanced around and caught a sympathetic look from a passerby, a ray of hope that someone recognized the injustice she was facing. Behind all the tension, Savannah felt the unconditional love and support of Brian, her husband who always stood by her side in every battle. That connection was her driving force, her light in the darkest moments. In the stifling security room, Savannah sat up straight, facing Patrick. She was no longer the weak one. In a firm voice, she reminded him that justice would come and that unjust actions would not be tolerated. Her confidence visibly unsettled Patrick, and at that moment, the door swung open. Brian stepped in, his eyes filled with worry, yet resolute. The room seemed to brighten with the belief that justice would prevail. Brian's presence was proof of love, connection, and steadfast trust, values that could never be shaken by injustice. Savannah sat in the stifling room, the silence hanging over her as if it were trying to crush her. Patrick, the security officer, maintained his cold, skeptical gaze, offering no relief from the unjust treatment she felt surging inside. Every minute dragged on, and the chaotic thoughts in her mind spun relentlessly. She could keenly feel the nervous anticipation, not knowing what would happen next. Patrick leaned forward, placing her ticket on the table as he continued to hurl accusatory, malicious questions. Savannah pressed her hands firmly onto her thighs to steady their trembling. She felt a deep sorrow that, despite doing nothing wrong, she was still regarded with suspicion. Yet she refused to let indignation overwhelm her. She clung to the hope that the truth would soon be revealed and that this injustice would finally end. Just as Patrick was about to continue his barrage of questions, the door swung open and Savannah saw Brian step in. Surprise filled the room as his determined, loving gaze met hers. His presence was like a steadfast support, helping her stand firm against the storm of doubt and discrimination. In that moment, Savannah felt a powerful connection, not only the bond of love, but also the belief that they would overcome this challenge together. Brian placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, infusing her with strength and calm. His deep, steady voice resonated as he addressed Patrick. "I want to know why my wife is being treated this way." His words, firm and resolute, carried no uncontrolled anger, only unwavering determination. Savannah felt the unconditional love and protection from her husband, a love that had been her anchor not only in moments of joy, but also in times of deep hardship. Savannah's gaze softened as she looked at Brian, her heart filling with hope that justice would prevail. The connection and love between them shone like a guiding light in the darkest hours. In that moment, she knew they would fight together, and no one could break that bond. Savannah sat on a cold metal chair in the enclosed room, her eyes fixed on Patrick, the security officer with a stern gaze. The tension in the air felt like an undercurrent ready to erupt. She tried to remain calm, yet Patrick's icy suspicion made her feel stripped of all respect. Her hands clutched together tightly as she fought to contain the storm of emotions within. She told herself that even if she were regarded as suspicious, she would not allow herself to break down. As Patrick continued his relentless interrogation, Savannah felt a deep pang of regret. She mourned the fact that, despite always working with fairness and integrity, she was being treated like a criminal. She recognized the complexity and injustice of the world, but that did not diminish her faith. Even in the face of this trial, Savannah held on to hope that justice would prevail and that the truth would soon come to light. Suddenly, the door burst open and Brian entered with a determined and resolute demeanor. His eyes scanned the room until they met Savannah's, and when he saw that she was safe, he let out a soft, relieved sigh. In that moment, surprise and relief overwhelmed her. Savannah felt the unconditional love of Brian, a love that not only shone in moments of happiness, but also served as a source of strength during the toughest times. Brian stepped forward, looking directly at Patrick with a steady, authoritative voice. "I want to know why my wife is being detained like this." His presence served as a shield, reassuring Savannah that she was not alone in her fight for justice. In his eyes, she saw a deep, unshakable bond, a connection built on love and trust. Under the weight of Brian's determination and Savannah's unwavering belief, Patrick began to falter. The atmosphere in the room lightened as a glimmer of hope emerged, suggesting that the truth would be revealed and that injustice would no longer be tolerated. Savannah and Brian squeezed each other's hands tightly, facing this challenge together, confident that their love and connection would help them overcome whatever lay ahead. In the stifling space of the room, Savannah felt her heart weighed down by regret and injustice. Her eyes brimmed with disappointment as she watched Patrick maintain his cold demeanor, his tightly pressed lips silently rejecting the truth. She recalled the times she had fought for fairness, the moments when she had placed her trust in a system that now seemed to turn its back on her. Empathy seeped into her thoughts as she remembered others who had suffered the same, those who had been abandoned amid favoritism and prejudice. Patrick continued his relentless questioning, his tone as cold as if she were invisible, as if she had no right to speak. Savannah kept her composure, though inside a storm of anger and regret raged. She wanted to prove that she wasn't a suspect, that the truth would eventually emerge. Her eyes locked on Patrick with unwavering determination and hope. She wasn't pleading for mercy. She was demanding justice, something everyone deserves. Suddenly, the door swung open and Brian entered, his face radiating unyielding determination. His presence was like a beam of light piercing the darkness, carrying intense hope. Savannah felt a surge of powerful emotion fill her, as the love and connection between them seemed to grow even stronger at that moment. Brian moved over to her and grasped her hand, affirming that he wouldn't let her face this injustice alone. "Patrick, I demand that you immediately verify the information," Brian said in a deep, steady, and forceful voice. His words struck the cold wall Patrick had tried to build. In that moment, Patrick wavered, and a flicker of hesitation shone in his eyes. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the oppressive tension giving way to a glimmer of hope. Savannah felt the powerful love and deep connection between her and Brian. Standing side by side, they faced the challenge together, knowing that they would overcome every obstacle because their love and determination were their greatest strengths. In that moment, Savannah understood that no matter how many barriers lay ahead, they would fight for justice and the truth together. In that moment of confinement, Savannah sat silently, her heart filled with regret and confusion. Her eyes glimmered with sadness as she thought about being treated as a suspect without any valid reason. She remembered others who had been treated unfairly, those without a voice or anyone to stand up for them. This deep empathy only heightened her sense of responsibility in the fight for justice. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Raymond entered with a resolute demeanor. He looked at Savannah with unwavering determination and protective intensity. His presence was like a ray of hope cutting through the darkness. "She doesn't deserve this," he said firmly, his voice carrying weight and conviction. His words rang out like a declaration of fairness, lightening the oppressive atmosphere in the room. Patrick hesitated for a moment, his cold confidence wavering under Raymond's resolute gaze. Savannah could feel her heart pounding faster, an electric nervousness coursing through every cell of her body. The strong connection between her and Raymond made her feel safe and protected. She felt the love and unwavering support from the man standing before her, a man willing to fight for her. Raymond stepped closer to Patrick, his voice brimming with authority. "I demand that you verify the information and ensure that Savannah is treated fairly." His words were not just a request, they were a warning. Patrick bent down and began rechecking the information with a serious expression. The atmosphere in the room seemed to quiet down, tension hanging thick as every second passed. Then Patrick looked up, his expression seemingly changed. "I've rechecked everything. All is in order," he said, his voice noticeably softer and laced with reluctance. An unexpected wave of relief and calm washed over Savannah. She offered a faint smile, sensing that hope and fairness were returning. In that moment, she understood that she was not alone, that the love and connection she shared with Raymond was a force no one could overcome, and they wouldn't stop until justice was served. In the quiet moment, Savannah sat alone in the small waiting room, the stifling space filled with a mix of complex emotions. She recalled Patrick's cold, prejudiced gaze, a silent judgment she'd felt all her life. Regret overwhelmed her as she thought about how she had been treated, not merely as an individual, but as a representative of all those who had been dismissed and sidelined. Memories of her battles for fairness and the reasons she had held steadfastly to what was right swirled in her mind. Suddenly, the door swung open, and her eyes lit up as Brian stepped in. His gaze was filled with deep concern and empathy. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his gentle voice carrying the strength of someone willing to do anything to protect the one he loved. Savannah nodded quietly, feeling the powerful connection between them, a silent bond that gave her hope. Brian then moved toward Patrick with a determined look in his eyes, leaving no trace of hesitation. "Can you explain why my wife is being detained without just cause?" he demanded in a calm yet forceful tone. For a moment, Patrick's cold confidence faltered, and his eyes betrayed a hint of uncertainty. The atmosphere grew charged, as if time itself had paused, waiting for an answer. Patrick glanced at Savannah, then turned back to his computer to double-check the information. A flash of surprise crossed his face. I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice now softer and laced with confusion. "Your ticket is completely valid." A surge of unexpected relief washed over Savannah. She offered a faint smile as hope and fairness began to resurface. "Thank you, Brian," she whispered, feeling the deep love and connection between them. In that moment, she realized that no matter how unjust the world might be, the support and solidarity of those who care can be the driving force behind the fight for justice and fairness. This was not just a temporary reprieve, it was the beginning of a real journey toward change. Later, in the tense meeting room, Savannah stood alongside Brian, her heart pounding as she looked into the expectant faces around her. She could feel Brian's supportive gaze beside her, a quiet yet powerful reminder that she was not alone. Taking a deep breath, she recalled every moment of judgment, every instance of doubt, and every time she had to stand up for herself and for those without a voice. "We cannot let this behavior continue," Savannah declared, her voice resonating with determination. Patrick's actions are not just a personal mistake. They reflect a deep systemic issue that we must address. In that moment, she noticed a flash of surprise on Raymond's face, a person she had always assumed would oppose her, now showing a glimmer of unexpected support. The atmosphere grew tense, with every passing second feeling as though it would stretch on forever. Savannah could sense the tension in every glance, yet she also saw tiny sparks of hope, signs that people were listening, that they recognized the need for change. Raymond cleared his throat, his initial surprise giving way to a serious resolve. "I agree that we need to take concrete steps to address this issue," he said in a deep, assured voice. A wave of relief and anticipation washed over Savannah. The connection between people who once seemed so different had created a moment of true significance. Brian gently squeezed her hand, the warmth of his touch easing her tension. "I've always believed you could do it," he murmured, his eyes full of love and pride. Amid the decisions being made, Savannah felt the empathy of those around her. People who had once been indifferent were now beginning to change. In that moment, she knew she had made a difference, that hope for a fair and ethical environment was no longer an unattainable dream. Love, connection, and determination were lighting the way for real change, and Savannah understood that this battle was only just beginning, but it had already sparked a light of hope and fairness she had longed for. Savannah sat quietly in her office, the soft glow from her computer screen reflecting on her face as she read a detailed report on the investigation involving Patrick and Raymond. The words raced past her, but what lingered was a deep sense of regret. She thought about all the times she had tried to effect change, only to realize that this system had long been corrupted, not merely the fault of one individual, but of an entire entrenched power structure. Brian walked in, his face filled with worry and empathy. He placed his hand on her shoulder as if to pass along some extra strength. "Are you okay?" he asked in a gentle tone that carried genuine concern. Savannah nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Not really," she admitted, "but we can't stop here." An idea suddenly sparked in her mind, a ray of hope. "We need a long-term solution," she said, her eyes lighting up with determination. "We can't just punish the wrongdoers. We must build a new culture where no one is treated unfairly." Brian squeezed her hand even tighter, and a powerful, deep connection flowed between them. "I believe you can do that. You always know how to ignite hope, even in the toughest situations," he said. At the next meeting, Savannah stood before everyone, her voice trembling slightly from nerves, yet filled with determination. "We have witnessed too much pain, too much injustice, and too many wrongful actions. Today is our chance to change things. We need to build a system of fairness where every person is treated with the respect they deserve." A heavy silence filled the room until suddenly Eleanor stood up, her voice choked with emotion. "I once thought that changes like these were impossible, but today I realize I was wrong. We can make a difference, and it starts right here, right now." Empathy spread throughout the room, and as eyes met across the space, the sense of connection grew stronger than ever. Savannah felt her heart pounding, as if a flame of hope had been ignited in everyone's chest. She knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but love, determination, and unity had already given them a meaningful beginning. This was their journey, a journey toward justice and a renewed hope for the future. Savannah stepped into the conference room where the directors and senior managers waited, their faces a mix of tension and anticipation. The atmosphere felt heavy, with all eyes fixed on her, seemingly waiting for an explanation. Savannah stood tall, her shoulders squared with determination, but her heart couldn't escape the deep sense of regret. She thought of those who had suffered, the voices that had been ignored, and the dreams that had been crushed by injustice. "We can't change the past," she began, her voice slightly trembling, but each word carried the weight of truth. "But today, we have the opportunity to make things right, to turn regret into action and build a culture of fairness and respect." Eleanor, seated at the end of the table, had tears welling in her eyes. "I've seen what you've done, Savannah. I know you're not just fighting for yourself, but for everyone who never had the chance to speak up. You've given hope to so many people." Eleanor's words created an unexpected connection, and Savannah's heart felt lighter. She sensed love and unity spreading throughout the room. A feeling of anticipation surged within her, knowing that this moment could be a turning point for everyone there. She glanced at Brian, who had always stood by her side, unwavering in his support. He offered a small, reassuring smile, his eyes filled with trust and love. Savannah took a deep breath, and her voice grew stronger. "We cannot wait for change to come from the outside. We are the ones who must make that change. Today, we start a new chapter, not just to correct past mistakes, but to build a future where everyone has the opportunity and the right to be treated with respect." Suddenly, one of the directors stood up and began to clap. The applause quickly spread across the room, powerful and full of emotion. A wave of hope swelled in Savannah's heart as she felt the strength of unity. This was no longer just her story. It was the story of everyone in that room who was committed to change and refused to accept injustice. Love, empathy, and faith in change had united them all, igniting a new light for the journey ahead. Savannah sat quietly in the airport waiting room, her eyes following the movements of passengers around her. Her heart still weighed heavily with regret over what had happened and the injustice she had faced. But deep inside, a fire of determination burned fiercely. She couldn't let this incident fade away as just a personal experience. It had to become a catalyst for change in a system that had been unjust for far too long. In that moment, Savannah realized she wasn't alone. Her eyes met those of a young woman sitting nearby. The woman's eyes shone with empathy and understanding, as if she too had experienced moments of being overlooked and unfairly judged. They shared a gentle smile, a silent but profound connection. It was a bond of love and hope among people who shared a desire for a better tomorrow. Suddenly, an announcement echoed through the air. Savannah stood up, pulled her suitcase, and headed toward the boarding gate. From a distance, Brian approached with an expression full of resolve. "You're not alone, Savannah," he whispered. "We'll do this together, not just for you, but for everyone who needs a voice." Savannah's heart fluttered. A wave of anticipation washed over her as she thought about the fight they were about to face. But Brian's presence beside her and the silent connection with the woman in the waiting room ignited hope within her. She knew that even though the road ahead would be difficult, they weren't alone. They were bound together by love and a shared desire to change the world. As Savannah stepped onto the plane, she felt the surprised gazes of passengers and crew. They recognized her, the woman who had bravely spoken up and faced injustice. A flight attendant approached her, her voice soft but sincere. "Thank you for fighting for change. You've inspired so many of us." Savannah smiled, her heart swelling with hope. She walked down the aisle with renewed confidence, knowing she was on a path toward meaningful change, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt small or forgotten. It was love, connection, and courage that she carried with her, like a bright torch in a stormy sky. Savannah walked into the large conference room at the airline headquarters, her heart pounding with anticipation. She knew that this meeting was her final chance to create the change she longed for. The regret over being treated unfairly, the judging glances, and the oppressive silence were still fresh in her mind. But Savannah wasn't alone in this fight. Brian stood by her side, holding her hand as a steady source of strength. The executives sat across from her, their expressions ranging from cautious to cold. But in that moment, Savannah noticed a glimmer of empathy in Eleanor's eyes, a woman she had only encountered briefly in previous meetings. Eleanor gave her a small nod, a silent message of encouragement, a sign that Savannah wasn't fighting alone. Savannah began her presentation, her voice steady despite the emotion in her heart. She shared her story, not to place blame, but to illuminate a painful truth about an unjust system. Each word carried hope that change was possible, that love and human connection could overcome injustice and discrimination. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Then, unexpectedly, Eleanor stood up and voiced her support for Savannah. A wave of surprise and relief washed over her as she saw other executives nodding in agreement. The connection among people with a shared goal became a flame that ignited a new hope. Brian squeezed her hand as the meeting concluded, his eyes filled with pride and faith. "You did it," he whispered, "and this is only the beginning." Savannah looked at him, her heart swelling with love and determination. She understood that while the road ahead would be challenging, the connection between people, empathy, and love would always be the greatest source of strength for creating real change. From that moment on, she knew they weren't just changing their own fate, but bringing hope to countless others. In the brightly lit conference room, the atmosphere was thick with tension as Savannah stood facing the board of directors. She knew that today was a decisive moment, a chance for justice to prevail. Memories of times she'd been treated unfairly flashed through her mind, moments she'd been overlooked, her words dismissed. But Savannah refused to let that pain control her. She held her head high, carrying with her the hope for change that she had fought for all along. She began presenting irrefutable evidence of the injustices within the system. Her voice echoed through the room, strong and resonant, yet filled with emotion. Each word seemed to reach into the hearts of those present. Anticipation filled the air as she concluded her speech, her eyes locking onto the people across from her, waiting for their response. In that moment of silence, she felt a connection, a shared desire for justice, a common ground with those who silently supported her. Suddenly, Eleanor, one of the most notoriously difficult directors, stood up. "I fully support what Savannah is proposing," she declared with determination. A wave of surprise spread across the room. One by one, others rose to voice their agreement with Eleanor. Love and empathy had broken down every barrier, creating a bond of solidarity that could not be denied. Savannah was overwhelmed, barely able to believe this transformation. She looked at Brian, who had stood by her side and supported her throughout this difficult journey. He smiled, his eyes full of pride and love. "You did it," he whispered, taking her hand in his. In that moment, Savannah realized that her hope was no longer a distant dream. Change was happening, and she was a crucial part of it. Her heart overflowed with emotion, empathy from others, anticipation for what lay ahead, regret for the past, hope for the future, and a powerful love that connected them all. This was the beginning of a more just future, and Savannah knew she would keep fighting for it, not only for herself, but for all those who needed her voice to speak on their behalf. In the warm glow of the meeting room, Savannah felt a wave of emotion wash over her as she stood before the board of directors. The air was thick with tension and anticipation, and she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She thought of the times she'd been ignored, treated unfairly, and the regret she felt for the missed opportunities for justice. But today, she stood there, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt invisible within the system. She began her speech with sincerity, her eyes shining with unwavering belief. Though her voice trembled with emotion at times, it carried a determination that couldn't be shaken. She recounted painful experiences she had witnessed and endured, evoking a deep sense of empathy among those listening. Her words, like drops of water, slowly softened the hardened defenses of those sitting across from her. Suddenly, Eleanor stood up. "I believe in what Savannah is saying, and I support her," she stated, her voice calm but resolute. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. No one had expected Eleanor, known for being difficult, to take Savannah's side. A feeling of surprise and anticipation spread through the room. As one by one others expressed their support, Savannah felt an undeniable connection between everyone present. This wasn't just a personal battle, but a bond among people who longed for justice and change. Savannah's eyes filled with tears as she turned to Brian, who had been by her side through every challenge. His gaze was filled with pride and love, a silent reminder that she was never alone on this journey. In that moment, the regrets of the past faded away, replaced by love and hope for a better future. Empathy, anticipation, and genuine love had triumphed over prejudice and barriers. Savannah smiled, knowing that she and those who stood with her had created something extraordinary, a change that could not be ignored. In the tense silence of the meeting room, Savannah stood up, feeling the weight of expectant, anxious, and doubtful eyes on her. Her gaze swept across the faces in front of her, her heart heavy with regret for the missed opportunities for fairness and the dreams that had been crushed due to injustice. But today, she wasn't standing there to complain about the past. She was there to build a new future, a future of hope and justice. Savannah's voice rang out, carrying sincerity and determination. "I'm not just speaking for myself, but for everyone who has ever felt like they didn't belong, for those who have endured unfair treatment. This isn't about a single incident. It's about changing an entire system." Her words ignited a sense of empathy in those listening, stirring an understanding that this was an opportunity to correct the mistakes of the past. Unexpectedly, Brian stood up, his eyes shining with faith and love as he looked at Savannah. "I believe in her and what she's doing. I will stand by her to make this change." The room fell into a hush of anticipation as Brian, one of the most influential voices, publicly declared his support. Emotions spread like a wave, and one by one, people stood up, expressing their agreement. Hope began to bloom, and the connection between everyone in the room became clearer than ever. This was no longer just Savannah's story. It was the story of everyone who yearned for justice and change. The turning point came when Eleanor stepped forward, gently placing her hand on Savannah's shoulder and saying, "You haven't just inspired us. You've reminded us that true change begins with brave choices like this." In that moment, Savannah realized that something miraculous had truly happened, not because of her alone, but because everyone present had chosen to stand up for justice, love, and the deep human connection that binds us all. She smiled, knowing that they had achieved victory, not just through reason, but through the power of their hearts. Savannah's story is a powerful testament to the value of courage and perseverance in the face of injustice. From the initial humiliation to her tireless fight, Savannah demonstrated that true change can only happen when we refuse to stay silent and accept wrongdoing. Her willingness to stand up not just for herself, but for others, shows that sometimes the greatest transformations begin with one individual's unwavering belief in justice. The story emphasizes that no act of fairness is too small, and that patience and compassion can lead to results far beyond what we expect. Connection, hope, and empathy are the forces that help us overcome challenges and build a more just world where everyone is respected and given a chance to succeed. Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting or enjoyable, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and reach more amazing viewers like you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our future uploads. Your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to create even better content for you.